The shot split the winter silence like a crack through ice. Snow erupted from the mountainside, a white fountain against black sky. The sound rolled through the basin, muffled by the storm, but sharp enough to wake every soul in the camp below. Somewhere in the dark, a figure froze mid-step, then melted backward into the trees. 72 hours earlier, the storm had not yet arrived. The convoy rolled into forward operating post Glacier just before sunset on a Thursday in February 1991. 12 soldiers, 4 trucks, and enough supplies to hold the position for a week. The camp sat in a narrow fold of the Cascade Mountains, 30 miles from the Canadian border, chosen for its isolation and the strategic choke point it controlled. A timber bridge crossed a frozen creek below the only supply route for 50 miles in any direction. Sergeant Rebecca Ashford stepped down from the last truck with her rifle case in one hand and her duffel in the other. The cold hit her face like a slap. 20 below, maybe colder with the wind. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath turn to vapor and vanish. The camp was sparse. 3 canvas tents arranged in a horseshoe around a central fire pit. Sandbags piled against the north side where the wind hit hardest. A radio mast swayed slightly, ice already forming on the guy wires. Beyond the perimeter, the forest pressed close, dark pines heavy with snow. Rebecca was 27 years old. Lean-built, 5'9", with short brown hair tucked under a wool cap. Her face had the kind of worn focus that came from spending too many nights awake in cold places. She moved with economy, no wasted motion, the way people move when they know fatigue is a luxury they cannot afford. She carried the rifle case to the main tent and set it down beside an empty cot. The case was battered military green with civilian modifications. Inside was a Winchester Model 70, a hunting rifle her father had owned, heavily customized for long-range precision work. Not standard issue, not even close. Lieutenant Marcus Brennan stood at the far end of the tent, reviewing a map spread across a folding table. He was 34, square-jawed, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he had never met a regulation he did not admire. He glanced up as Rebecca entered, his eyes moving from her face to the rifle case and back again. "Ashford." "Sir, that's your personal weapon." "Yes, sir." He frowned. "You were issued an M24. "I know, sir. I brought it as well. This one I'm more familiar with." Brennan walked over, the hands clasped behind his back. He looked down at the case like it was a piece of evidence in a trial. "Regulations state all personnel use standard issue equipment in the field." Rebecca met his eyes without flinching. "With respect, sir, regulations also allow for exceptions when approved by the commanding officer." "I haven't approved anything." "Not yet, sir." The silence stretched. Outside, someone shouted coordinates for the perimeter markers. The wind rattled the tent canvas. Brennan turned back to his map. "Rack it with the others. Use your M24 on watch." Rebecca said nothing. She picked up the case and moved to the weapon rack near the entrance, but she did not open it. Instead, she set the case beside her cot and began unpacking her duffel. Across the tent, a stocky man with graying hair watched the exchange. Master Sergeant Dutch Callahan was 57 years old, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he had been cold, wet, and miserable in more countries than most people could name. He had been in the Army since 1972. Grenada, Panama, the Gulf just 3 months ago. Now this a training exercise in the mountains, which felt almost like a vacation by comparison. Dutch caught Rebecca's eye and gave a slight nod. She returned it, barely perceptible, then went back to organizing her gear. By nightfall, the camp had settled into routine. The fire pit burned low, rationed for warmth rather than light. Soldiers rotated in and out of the tents, checking weapons, securing tarps, adjusting loads. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Rebecca sat on her cot, cleaning the Winchester with methodical precision. She had disassembled the bolt, wiped down the firing pin, checked the extractor. The suppressor was wrapped in electrical tape to prevent metal-to-skin freeze. The scope was a loopholed Mark IV, clear glass, no scratches. She ran a cloth along the barrel, slow and deliberate, the way her father had taught her. Major William Ashford had been a helicopter pilot. Flew Hueys in the early 80s, then transitioned to the newer Blackhawks. Rebecca had grown up on military bases, moving every 2 years, learning to pack light and make no permanent friends. Her father had been her constant. He taught her to shoot when she was 12, starting with a .22 rifle in the woods behind Fort Campbell. By the time she was 16, she could put 5 rounds through the same hole at 100 yards. He died in 1983. Training accident. Mechanical failure during a night flight over the Carolinas. Rebecca had been 19 halfway through her second year at a state college she hated. She dropped out the following semester and enlisted 6 months later. She finished reassembling the rifle and set it on the cot beside her. The weight of it was familiar, comforting, in a way that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with memory. Across the tent, Sergeant Victor Rhodes watched her with narrowed eyes. Rhodes was 36, built like a linebacker with a blunt face and a voice that carried. He had been in longer than Rebecca, deployed more often, and he did not like exceptions. "You planning to sleep with that thing, Ashford?" Rebecca looked up. "If I need to." "Regulations say weapons go in the rack." "Regulations say a lot of things." Rhodes stood boots heavy on the plywood floor. "You think you're special because you can shoot? No. Then rack the weapon." Rebecca held his gaze. "I'll keep it close." "That an order you're refusing? That a question you want to escalate?" Dutch Callahan spoke from the far corner, his voice calm and flat. "Rhodes, let it go." Rhodes turned. "She's violating?" "She's keeping her sidearm in reach. That's not a violation. That's preparedness." "Sidearm's a pistol. That's a rifle." "Semantics." Dutch leaned back against the tent pole, arms crossed. "If it bothers you, sleep in the other tent." Rhodes stared at him for a long moment, then spat into an empty cup and sat back down. The tension hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca did not acknowledge the exchange. She pulled her sleeping bag over her legs and laid the rifle along her right side, the sling looped over her wrist. The barrel angled toward the tent wall, muzzle pointed safely away. Her finger was nowhere near the trigger. She closed her eyes, but she did not sleep. Not deeply. She never did. The night was cold and still. Outside, Private Cole Mitchell stood watch at the eastern perimeter, his breath steaming in the glow of a red lens flashlight. He was 23, fresh out of advanced training, eager and nervous in equal measure. This was his first field exercise in conditions this extreme. He scanned the tree line with his rifle at low, ready, listening. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, just the faint creak of ice settling in the branches. Inside the tent, the fire in the small stove burned low. Soldiers slept in shifts, boots unlaced but still on, gloves within reach. The stove hissed softly, the only sound aside from the occasional rustle of a sleeping bag. Rebecca lay on her side, the Winchester pressed against her ribs. The metal was cold, even through her thermal layers. She could feel the checkering on the stock, the slight pressure of the bolt handle. Her breathing was slow, measured, timed to conserve warmth. She thought about her father, about the last time she had seen him 3 days before the accident. He had been preparing for a night training flight, going over pre-flight checks with the same focus he brought to everything. She had asked him why he still flew training missions when he could have taken a desk job. He had looked at her with that slight smile he always had when she asked the obvious. Because someone has to teach the next generation how to stay alive. She had not understood then. She did now. The sling buckle tapped softly against the cot frame as she shifted position. The sound was small, rhythmic, persistent. It found every set of ears that was not quite asleep. Across the tent, Rhodes opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. The tapping continued. Tap, pause, tap. He muttered something under his breath and pulled his blanket over his head. Morning came gray and cold. The sky was a flat sheet of cloud low enough to touch the tops of the pines. Snow had fallen during the night, 2 inches of fresh powder that covered the older crust. Lieutenant Brennan gathered the squad outside the main tent for the morning brief. 12 soldiers stood in 2 loose rows, breath-misting hands shoved into pockets. Brennan held a laminated map, his voice crisp and clear. "Mission overview. We hold this position for 5 days. Intelligence indicates Red Team led by Captain Diane Cross will attempt to breach our perimeter and sabotage the bridge. Our job is to prevent that. Rules of engagement are non-lethal. Laser tag sensors on all weapons. If you get tagged, you're out. If the bridge gets tagged, we fail." He pointed to the map. Perimeter is divided into 4 quadrants, north, south, east, west. 2-man rotations every 4 hours. Radar coverage on the north and south approaches. East and west are visual observation only. Rebecca stood at the back of the formation, arms crossed. She studied the map from a distance, noting the gaps. The eastern approach followed a narrow gorge that fed into the basin. It was the hardest road to access, but it also offered the most cover. If she were planning an attack, that is where she would come from. Brennan continued. Red Team has superior numbers. 8 personnel, all experienced. They will probe for weaknesses. Do not give them any. Questions? No one spoke. Good. First watch assignments are posted. Dismissed. The group dispersed. Rebecca walked to the board nailed to a pine tree near the command tent. Her name was listed for the 0200 to 0600 shift western quadrant. Not where she wanted to be. Dutch appeared beside her, reading over her shoulder. "You wanted east?" "Yes." "Why, because that's where they'll come from." Dutch tilted his head slightly. Brennan thinks north. Open approach, good sight lines. Brennan's wrong. You should tell him that. Rebecca glanced at him. Would he listen? Dutch smiled faintly. No, but you should tell him anyway. The day passed slowly. Soldiers checked equipment, reinforced positions, tested communications. The radio crackled with static comms checks every 30 minutes. The radar hummed in its tent a low electrical whine that set teeth on edge. Rebecca spent the afternoon walking the perimeter alone. She moved quietly through the snow, studying the ground, the trees, the way the wind moved through the gorge. She crouched beside a cluster of tracks near the eastern edge. Animal prints canine, probably the stray dogs that had been seen near the camp the day before. Two sets moving together heading west. She stood and looked toward the gorge. The land dropped sharply, a natural funnel that would force anyone approaching to move in single file. Good defensively, but only if someone was watching it. She pulled out a small notebook and sketched the terrain marking sight lines and dead zones. The gorge was a blind spot. Brennan's watch plan left it exposed for 3 hours during the night shift rotation. When she returned to camp, she found Dutch near the fire pit brewing coffee on a portable stove. He handed her a tin cup without a word. She took it, warming her hands. Find anything, dog tracks. Fresh from this morning. And they were heading away from the gorge, not toward it. Dutch sipped his coffee. Dogs run. That's what they do. These dogs have been hanging around camp for scraps. They don't run unless something scares them. Or someone. Rebecca nodded slowly. Dutch set his cup down. You think they're already scouting, Bragg? I think someone walked through that gorge this morning, quietly enough not to leave obvious tracks, but not quietly enough to avoid spooking the dogs. You tell Brennan. Would he believe me? Dutch considered. Probably not yet. Rebecca drank her coffee in silence, staring at the tree line. That evening, the tension in the camp was palpable. Rhodes made a point of checking the weapon rack, counting rifles, ensuring everything was in place. He stopped at Rebecca's cot where the Winchester still rested beside her sleeping bag, still not racking it. Rebecca was sitting on the edge of her cot, lacing her boots. No. You know what people are saying. I don't care what people are saying. Rhodes leaned closer. They're saying you're spooked, that you can't handle the field anymore. Rebecca finished tying her boot and looked up at him. Her voice was quiet, steady. If I were spooked, I wouldn't be here. Then why the gun? Because I'm prepared. For whatever comes. Rhodes shook his head and walked away. Behind him, Corporal Nina Hartley sat on her own cot, pretending to read a manual. She glanced at Rebecca, then away, saying nothing. Outside, the wind picked up. The temperature dropped again. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. By 2,100 hours, visibility was less than 50 yards. Brennan gathered the squad one more time before nightfall. He stood in the center of the main tent, the stove glowing behind him. Weather's getting worse. Red team will use this. Stay sharp. Trust your equipment. Trust each other. He paused, his eyes moving across the group. They landed on Rebecca for a moment, then moved on. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The group dispersed to their assigned sleep shifts. Rebecca lay down on her cot, fully dressed, except for her boots. The Winchester was already in position, sling looped over her wrist. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind, the canvas, the creak of the tent poles. And underneath it all, something else. A rhythm that did not match the storm. She opened her eyes and stared at the tent ceiling, her hand resting lightly on the rifle stock. Somewhere out in the dark, someone was moving. At midnight, Dutch Callahan sat alone in the command tent reviewing the watch schedule. A small heater hummed in the corner, barely keeping the cold at bay. He rubbed his hands together and reached for the radio handset, checking in with the sentries. North post status. North clear. South post status. South clear. West post status. A pause. Then Rebecca's voice, low and calm. West observing, no movement. Dutch frowned. You're not assigned west until 0200. I know, I'm checking the line. Get some sleep, Ashford. Copy. But she did not move from her position. She stood at the western edge of the camp, rifle in hand, scanning the gorge with her naked eye. The snow fell steadily now, thick flakes that dissolved on her gloves. She saw nothing, heard nothing. But the absence felt wrong. The dogs were still gone. The radio static had changed, a faint flutter that came and went, irregular and deliberate. And when she crouched low, shining her red lens light across a patch of snow near the perimeter wire, she saw it. A section of snow that was too smooth, too even. The crystals on top were uniform, lacking the random sparkle of fresh fall. It looked like someone had brushed over it, carefully trying to erase a trail. She keyed her radio. Dutch, I need you to see something. A long pause. Where are you, Quam? Eastern perimeter, near the gorge. Another pause. Then stay put. 5 minutes later, Dutch emerged from the darkness, moving quietly despite his size. He knelt beside her, following her light. There, Rebecca pointed. That patch. It's been brushed. Dutch studied it, his breath misting. He reached out with one gloved hand and pressed lightly into the snow. It held, then collapsed slightly, revealing a compressed layer beneath. Someone had stepped here, then tried to cover it. He stood slowly scanning the tree line. How long ago? Within the last 6 hours, snow's been falling steady. If it was older, it would be covered. Dutch keyed his radio. Brennan, this is Callahan. We've got a possible contact indicator on the eastern perimeter. The radio crackled. Define possible. Disturbed snow. Looks like someone tried to cover tracks. Could be wind. Wind doesn't brush in straight lines. A pause, then Brennan's voice sharper. I'm coming out. Brennan arrived with Rhodes and two others. They stood in a loose circle around the patch of snow, shining their lights. The wind had picked up, and fresh snow was already beginning to fill in the details. Brennan crouched, examining the area. He pressed his hand into the snow the way Dutch had, feeling the resistance. When he stood, his expression was unreadable. Could be animals, could be runoff from the trees. Rebecca spoke quietly. Animals don't brush snow back into place. Brennan turned to her. You think Red Team is already here? I think someone scouted this area, and I think they know we're not watching the gorge closely enough. Rhodes snorted. We've got radar on 2 quadrants, visual on the other 2. If someone's out there, we'll see them. Radar doesn't cover the gorge, Rebecca said, and visual doesn't work in a whiteout. Brennan stared at her for a long moment. You're suggesting we change the watch plan based on a patch of smooth snow. I'm suggesting we cover the gap. There is no gap. The plan is solid. Rebecca said nothing. She knew argument was pointless. Brennan had made his decision before he walked out here. Brennan straightened. Rhodes marked this location. We'll check it again in the morning. Everyone else back to your assignments. The group dispersed. Dutch lingered for a moment, standing beside Rebecca as the others walked away. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Doesn't matter if no one listens. It matters. Dutch looked out toward the gorge. You know why I trust you, Rebecca glanced at him. Because you think like your father. He didn't wait for permission to do the right thing either. He turned and walked back toward camp, leaving Rebecca alone at the edge of the perimeter. She stood there for another 5 minutes, watching the snow fall into the gorge. The wind carried a faint sound so brief she almost missed it, a metallic scrape like fabric against a buckle. Then nothing. She keyed her radio. Dutch, did you hear that? Hear what? Never mind. She released the key and adjusted the rifle sling across her shoulder. The Winchester felt heavier than usual, or maybe she was just tired. She turned and walked back toward camp, her boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. Behind her, deep in the gorge, a shadow shifted against the trees. Then it was gone. Inside the main tent, Rebecca lay on her cot with the rifle pressed against her side. The sling was tight around her wrist, the stock warm from her body heat. She could hear Rhodes breathing heavily across the tent, could hear the stove ticking as it cooled. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Her mind replayed the evening, the brushed snow, the metallic scrape, the absence of the dogs. Individually, each sign was minor. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, and when they came, it would be through the gorge. She opened her eyes and stared at the tent ceiling, her fingers resting lightly on the rifle's safety. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, bearing evidence and creating new opportunities for those who knew how to move unseen. Rebecca did not move. She simply waited, listening to the night, counting the hours until her watch shift began. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was doing the same. The first light came gray and hesitant, barely strong enough to separate sky from mountain. Rebecca had not slept. She sat on the edge of her cot, the Winchester, across her knees, watching the tent entrance as soldiers began to stir. The stove had gone cold sometime after 0400. No one had bothered to restart it. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind 2 feet of fresh snow and a silence so complete it felt like pressure against the eardrums. Private Cole Mitchell stumbled in from his watch shift, face red from cold and ice crusted in his eyebrows. He stripped off his outer gloves and held his hands near the dead stove before realizing it was out. Anyone got heat? No one answered. Rhodes was still asleep, or pretending to be. Dutch sat in the corner, lacing his boots with the slow deliberation of a man who had learned long ago that rushing in cold weather only led to mistakes. Rebecca stood, slinging the rifle across her back. She pulled on her parka and gloves, then stepped outside into the blue pre-dawn light. The camp looked different under the new snow, softer. The hard edges of sandbags and equipment were rounded over the perimeter wire buried in drifts. The wind had sculpted the surface into long ripples like frozen waves. She walked to the eastern edge where she and Dutch had found the brush patch the night before. It was gone now, completely covered. No evidence remained. She crouched anyway, studying the area looking for anything the storm might have revealed instead of hidden. Nothing. She stood and turned toward the gorge. The slope dropped away, sharply disappearing into a maze of snow-heavy pines. Visibility was better now, maybe 100 yards before the trees swallowed everything. She raised her binoculars and glassed the tree line slowly left to right, looking for shapes that did not belong. A branch moved, just a slight dip snow sliding off. Natural. She watched it for 30 seconds. No further movement. She lowered the binoculars and keyed her radio. Dutch, you awake? Unfortunately. I'm going to walk the gorge. 20 minutes. A pause. Alone. Unless you want to join me. Hold position. I'm coming. Rebecca waited, scanning the forest. The cold had teeth now biting through every layer. Her breath came in short clouds. She flexed her fingers inside her gloves, keeping circulation moving. Dutch appeared 5 minutes later, rifle slung, moving with the careful steps of someone who knew how to walk quietly in snow. He stopped beside her, looking down into the gorge. See anything? No, but I want to check the low ground. If someone came through last night, there might be traces below the drift line. Dutch nodded. Lead on. They descended slowly, using trees for handholds, boots breaking through the crust with each step. The gorge narrowed as they went deeper, the walls rising on either side, until the sky was just a ribbon of gray above them. Rebecca stopped at a cluster of boulders partially sheltered from the wind. Snow had accumulated here, but not as deeply. She knelt, brushing away the surface layer with her glove. There. A depression in the snow, faint but distinct. The shape was wrong for an animal print. Too elongated. She cleared more snow, following the edge. A boot print, filled in but still visible. Military tread, a size 10 or 11. She measured it with her hand, then looked up at Dutch. He crouched beside her, studying it. Fresh, within 24 hours. The edges are too sharp for older. Dutch stood, scanning the area. One print doesn't mean much. Could be one of ours from yesterday. Our people didn't come this far down. Brennan's sweep stopped at the rim. You're sure? I am. I watched them. Dutch was quiet for a moment. Then he keyed his radio. Brennan Callahan, we've got a confirmed boot print in the gorge. Recent. The radio crackled. How recent? Last 24 hours. Ours or theirs? Dutch looked at Rebecca. She shook her head. Unknown, Dutch said. But it's not on any of our patrol routes. Mark it. I'll send Rhodes down to verify. Dutch pulled a strip of orange surveyor's tape from his pocket and tied it to a nearby branch. He marked the coordinates on his GPS, then straightened. Anything else? Rebecca moved deeper into the gorge, stepping carefully, eyes on the ground. 30 yards further, she stopped. There, caught on a thorn bush, was a small piece of fabric, white, synthetic. She pulled it free and held it up to the light. Dutch came up beside him. Let me see. She handed it to him. He examined it closely, rubbing the material between his fingers. Snow camo, military grade. Red team. Could be. He pocketed the fabric. Could also be from last year's exercise. It's not weathered. This is recent. Dutch nodded slowly. He keyed his radio again. Brennan, we've also got a fabric sample. Looks like snow camouflage. This time the response was immediate. Bring it in, both of you, now. They climbed back up slower this time, the slope steeper with the fresh snow. By the time they reached the rim, Rhodes was waiting with 2 others. He did not look pleased. Lieutenant wants you in the command tent. Move. Rebecca and Dutch exchanged a glance, then walked toward the center of camp. Soldiers were emerging now, groggy and stiff, moving through morning routines. Someone had gotten the stove relit. Smoke drifted from the main tent. Inside, Brennan stood over the map table, arms crossed. His face was tight. When Rebecca and Dutch entered, he gestured sharply to the table. Show me. Dutch laid out the fabric sample and pulled up the GPS coordinates on a handheld device. He pointed to a spot on the map. Boot print here. Fabric 20 meters southeast. Brennan examined the fabric without touching it. This could be old. It's not, Rebecca said. The material is clean. No sun fade, no degradation. It's been out there less than 48 hours. You an expert on textiles now? Sergeant, Rebecca met his eyes. I'm an expert on observation, sir. And I'm telling you, someone was in that gorge recently. Rhodes spoke from the tent entrance. Could be our own people. Could be a hiker who wandered through before we set up. Hikers don't wear military snow camo, Dutch said, and our people didn't patrol that sector. Brennan was silent for a long moment, staring at the map. Finally, he straightened. I'll send a team to sweep the area. Full documentation. If Red Team is scouting, we need to know their approach vector. They're coming from the east, Rebecca said. Through the gorge. It's the only route that gives them cover all the way to the bridge. That's speculation. It's tactics. If I were planning this, that's the route I'd use. Brennan's jaw tightened. You're not planning this. Captain Cross is. And I'm not restructuring our entire defensive posture based on a boot print in a scrap of fabric. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. Arguing would accomplish nothing. Brennan turned to Rhodes. Take a four-man team, full sweep of the gorge grid pattern, document everything. I want photos, coordinates, measurements. Treat it like a crime scene. Yes, sir. Brennan looked at Rebecca and Dutch. You two are off watch rotation until further notice. I need you rested in case this turns into something. Dutch nodded. Rebecca said nothing. They left the tent. Outside the camp was fully awake now. Soldiers moved through drills, checking weapons, testing communications. The sun had finally cleared the mountains pale and cold. Nina Hartley appeared from the medical tent. She caught Rebecca's eye and tilted her head slightly. Rebecca followed her to the edge of camp, out of earshot. Nina gestured for her to sit on a supply crate. I heard what happened in there. Word travels fast. Rhodes has a big mouth. Nina pulled a protein bar from her pocket and handed it to Rebecca. For what it's worth, I believe you. Rebecca looked at her. Why? Because I looked up your record last night. Alaska winter of 1990. You detected a fuel leak in the generator shed before anyone smelled it. Saved 6 people from carbon monoxide poisoning. Rebecca said nothing. You see things other people miss, Nina continued. I don't know if it's training or instinct, but it's real. So when you say someone was in that gorge, I believe you. Brennan doesn't. Brennan's scared. He's young for a lieutenant. This is his first independent command. If he calls for backup and nothing happens, he looks incompetent. If he doesn't call for backup and something happens, he looks negligent. So he's paralyzed. Rebecca unwrapped the protein bar, chewing slowly. The cold made everything taste like cardboard. Nina glanced around, then lowered her voice. Dutch told me about your father, about Grenada. Rebecca stiffened. What about it? That Dutch was there, that your father pulled him out. That's his story to tell, not mine. He told it last night to me and Mitchell. He wanted us to know why he trusts you. Nina paused. Your father flew into a hot landing zone, took fire, got Dutch and 3 others out. 2 months later, training accident took him. Rebecca looked away toward the gorge. My father made choices. Some of them cost him. That's not a lesson worth romanticizing. Dutch doesn't romanticize it. He lives with it. Every day. That's why he's watching your back now. Rebecca finished the protein bar and stood. I need to prep my gear. She walked away before Nina could respond. Across the camp, Dutch stood with Mitchell's near the fire pit. The young private was asking questions, his voice earnest and quick. Dutch answered patiently, occasionally pointing toward the gorge or the bridge. Rebecca watched them for a moment, then returned to the main tent. She needed rest, even if sleep would not come. The next watch shift was 8 hours away, but she had learned long ago that exhaustion was cumulative. You banked rest when you could. She lay on her cot, the Winchester beside her, and closed her eyes. The tent was quiet now, most of the soldiers outside on duty or drills. She could hear the distant sound of voices, the crunch of boots in snow. Her mind drifted not to sleep, but to a place adjacent to it, a state where thoughts slowed but awareness remained. She had learned this in her first deployment, a way to rest without ever fully letting go. Images surfaced, her father in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls. The last conversation they had 3 days before the accident. He had been checking instruments, running through procedures with the methodical focus he brought to everything. She had asked him why he still flew dangerous missions when he could have requested safer assignments. He had looked at her with that slight smile. Because the mission matters more than comfort. That's what separates the living from the dead. She had not fully understood then. She did now. The tent flap opened. Rhodes entered, followed by 3 others. They were covered in snow, breathing hard. Rhodes saw Rebecca and stopped. You awake? She opened her eyes. Yes. We found something. She sat up. What? More prints. A whole line of them running parallel to the gorge about 50 meters above the creek bed. 6 different boot sizes. They tried to cover them, but the wind shifted some of the snow. Rebecca swung her legs off the cot. 6 people, at least, could be more. We followed the trail for a quarter mile before it disappeared into the rocks. Direction, southeast, away from the bridge. Rebecca stood pulling on her boots. They're circling, probing for weak points. Rhodes nodded slowly. That's what Brennan thinks too. He's calling a briefing in 10 minutes. The tent filled quickly. 12 soldiers packed into the small space breath, misting faces serious. Brennan stood at the map table, his expression grim. Red team is confirmed in the area. We've got multiple boot prints, fabric evidence, and a probable scouting road along the eastern gorge. They're mapping our perimeter. He pointed to the map. Current assessment, they're looking for gaps in our coverage. Once they find one, they'll exploit it. Our job is to make sure there are no gaps. Rhodes spoke up. We could call for reinforcements. Get another squad up here. Negative. This is a training exercise. Calling for help is an automatic fail. We hold with what we have. Then we need to tighten the watch rotation, Dutch said. 2-hour shifts instead of 4. Keep everyone fresher. Brennan nodded. Agreed. New rotation starts at 1800 hours. I'm also adding a roving patrol. 2-man team random pattern checking dead zones. He looked at Rebecca. Ashford, you're on the roving patrol. You and Mitchell. You'll move between fixed positions, filling gaps. Stay in radio contact at all times. Rebecca nodded. Yes, sir. Dutch, you'll coordinate from the command tent. I want eyes on all quadrants all the time. If a squirrel moves out there, I want to know about it. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering contingencies, communication protocols, and rules of engagement. When it ended, the soldiers dispersed to their assignments. Rebecca found Mitchell near the equipment tent checking his rifle. He looked up as she approached. We're partners, I guess. Looks that way. Mitchell was 23 with a boyish face that made him look younger, but his hands were steady as he checked his magazine, and his eyes were alert. I've never done a roving patrol before. It's simple. We move, we watch, we report. No heroics. What if we make contact? We don't engage unless we have to. Our job is to observe and alert. Let the fixed positions handle the response. Mitchell nodded. Got it. They spent the next hour prepping gear. Extra batteries for radios? Fresh hand warmers. Ammunition, though Rebecca doubted they would need it. The laser tag sensors on their weapons would simulate hits, but the real danger was exposure and exhaustion. At 1800 hours, they moved out. The sun was already dropping toward the mountains, the light going flat and blue. Frost formed on metal within seconds of exposure. Rebecca led, moving slowly along the eastern perimeter, eyes scanning the tree line. Mitchell followed 10 paces back, covering their rear. They moved in silence, communicating with hand signals when necessary. The first loop took 40 minutes. They checked the northern positions, then swung east toward the gorge, then south toward the bridge. No contacts, no movement, just the endless white of snow and the dark verticals of trees. On the second loop, Rebecca stopped at the gorge rim. She crouched, glassing the forest below with her binoculars. Mitchell knelt beside her, rifle ready. See anything? No, but the light's wrong. Too many shadows. She lowered the binoculars and listened. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of ice in the branches. Mitchell shifted his weight. This place feels wrong. It is wrong. Stay sharp. They moved on, circling back toward the command tent. Dutch's voice came over the radio. Roving patrol status. Second loop complete, no contacts. Copy. Take a 15-minute break, then run it again. Rebecca and Mitchell returned to the fire pit. Someone had restocked the wood supply. They stood in silence, stomping their feet to keep circulation moving. Nina appeared from the medical tent. She looked at Rebecca, then at the gorge. You really think they're out there? I know they are. How? Rebecca gestured toward the tree line. Listen. What do you hear? Nina listened. Nothing. Exactly. In a forest this size, there should be sound. Birds, animals, wind, but there's nothing. That means something scared everything away. Or the cold drove them to cover. Maybe. Rebecca checked her watch. But I don't think so. The 15 minutes passed quickly. Rebecca and Mitchell moved out again, this time taking a different route, more random, less predictable. They swung wide to the west, then cut back sharply to the east, trying to cover areas that the fixed positions could not see. On the fourth loop, Rebecca saw it. A disturbance in the snow 50 yards downslope from the gorge rim. Not a print, not fabric, just a depression, barely visible in the fading light. She stopped, hand up. Mitchell froze. Rebecca keyed her to radio, keeping her voice low. Dutch, I've got something. Western edge of the gorge grid, November 7. What is it? Possible hide site. Snow's been compressed, then partially filled back in. Hold position. I'm sending backup. Rebecca and Mitchell waited, crouched low, weapons ready. The light was almost gone now, the forest a mass of shadows and half-shapes. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken, not from fear but from focus. This was the moment, the confirmation she had been waiting for. Rhodes arrived with two others moving quietly. He crouched beside Rebecca. "Show me," she pointed. "There. See the depression." Someone was lying prone probably for an hour or more. They shifted position twice, then tried to cover the site when they left. Rhodes studied it, then nodded slowly. "You're right, that's a hide." He keyed his radio. "Brennan, we've got a confirmed observation at post. Red team has been watching us." Brennan's voice was tight. "When unknown, could be yesterday, could be today. Mark it and pull back. I don't want anyone exposed after dark." Rhodes tied off another piece of surveyor's tape and stood. "Let's move." They returned to camp as full darkness settled. The cold deepened, breath crystallizing in the air and falling like dust. Inside the command tent, Brennan paced. The map was covered with new marks now, each one representing a piece of evidence. Boot prints, fabric, hide sites. The pattern was clear. Red team was out there, watching, waiting, learning the routines. Brennan stopped pacing and looked at the assembled group. Dutch, Rhodes, Rebecca, Mitchell, Nina. "They're going to hit us tonight, I can feel it." Dutch nodded. "Agreed. They've done their reconnaissance, now they'll act." "The question is where," Rhodes said. Everyone looked at the map. Brennan traced the perimeter with his finger. "North is too exposed. South has the radar. West is wide open. That leaves east." He looked at Rebecca. "You were right. They're coming through the gorge." Rebecca said nothing. Validation felt hollow now. Brennan straightened. "We double the watch on the eastern quadrant. 4 personnel overlapping fields of fire. Dutch, you coordinate from here. Rhodes, you take the north. I'll take the south. Ashford, Mitchell, you two stay mobile. If they come, I want you in position to respond." But before anyone could move, the radio crackled. A woman's voice came through, clear and professional. "Blue team, this is Red team actual. We acknowledge your defensive posture. Well executed, but the exercise is not over. We will complete our objective. You have until 0300 hours to prevent us. Good luck." The transmission ended. Static filled the tent. Brennan looked at his watch. "That gives us 7 hours." Rhodes spoke from the corner. "It's a sight game. They want us paranoid, exhausted, making mistakes." "Maybe," Dutch said, "or maybe they're telling the truth. 0300 is the coldest part of night. Our alertness will be lowest. That's when they'll move." Rebecca stepped to the table, studying the map with fresh eyes. Something about the broadcast bothered her. Too confident, too specific. "Sir, I don't think they're coming through the gorge anymore." Brennan frowned. "Why not?" "Because they know we're watching it now. That broadcast wasn't just psychological. It was tactical. They're telling us they've changed their approach." "Then where?" Rebecca traced a line on the map with her finger. "Here, the western slope. There's a dry creek bed that runs most of the way down. It's steeper, more exposed, but if they use it, they can get within 100 yards of the bridge without crossing open ground." Dutch examined the route. "That's a hard climb, especially at night, in this cold. But not impossible, and they have the advantage of surprise. We've been focused east for 2 days. They'll exploit that." Brennan was quiet, thinking. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we hedge our bets. Keep the eastern watch in place, but reinforce the west. Ashford, you and Mitchell take the high ground overlooking that creek bed. If they come that way, you'll see them first." "What about the bridge itself?" Rhodes asked. "I'll position there with Garrett and Simmons. 3-man team. If they get past our outer positions, we're the last line." The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, refining details, assigning positions, establishing communication protocols. When it ended, Rebecca and Mitchell geared up, adding extra ammunition and thermal equipment. At 1900 hours, they moved to their position. The western slope was exactly as Rebecca had described it. Steep, exposed. But the dry creek bed cut a natural route through the terrain, sheltered enough to conceal movement if you were careful. They settled into a hide among the rocks 50 yards above the creek bed with a clear line of sight down the slope. Night fell completely, and with it came a cold that seemed to have weight pressing down like a physical presence. Mitchell spoke quietly. "You really think they'll come this way?" "If I were planning it, I would." "What if you're wrong?" "Then we'll know soon enough." They waited as the hours crawled past. Rebecca switched to thermal imaging, scanning the slope in methodical sweeps. Nothing. Just the cold radiation of rocks and trees. Midnight came and went. The radio crackled occasionally with check-ins from other positions. All clear. No movement. No contacts. At 0145, Rebecca's radio came alive with Dutch's voice. All positions, we've got movement on the eastern perimeter. Multiple contacts. Rebecca tensed. How many? At least 4. They're probing the gorge defenses. She looked at Mitchell. It's a diversion. They want us to pull resources east. Should we report that? Dutch already knows. He'll handle it. She kept her eye on the western slope, trusting her instinct. If Red Team was smart, and they were, they would use the diversion to mask their real approach. At 0230, she saw it. A heat signature, faint and distant, moving slowly up the creek bed. She touched Mitchell's arm and pointed. He raised his thermal scope and confirmed. One individual, moving slow, 100 yards out. Rebecca keyed, her radio voice barely audible. Dutch, contact, western slope. Single individual in the creek bed. Copy, stand by. She watched the signature. It stopped, crouched, waited. Then 2 more appeared behind it. Make that 3 contacts, moving in formation. Brennan's voice cut in. Are you certain? Confirmed, 3 individuals, thermal positive, moving toward the bridge. Hold position. Do not engage unless they cross the 100-yard line. Rebecca tracked them through her scope. They were moving with discipline, stopping frequently to check their flanks using cover efficiently. Professional, experienced. At 80 yards, they stopped. The lead figure raised what looked like binoculars scanning the bridge. Rebecca could see the faint glow of the thermal imager in their hands. They were checking for sentries. She keyed her spartum. They're observing the bridge, preparing for final approach. Brennan's voice was tight. I need 5 more minutes to get into position. Can you stall them? Rebecca looked at Mitchell. He nodded. She raised her rifle, finding the lead figure in her scope. Not a lethal shot, a warning, just like before. She aimed at the snow 3 feet in front of the lead figure, exhaled halfway, found the stillness, and fired. The crack of the rifle echoed across the slope. Snow erupted in a white fountain. The 3 figures froze, then immediately dove for cover. Rebecca chambered another round. That's your warning. Next one's closer. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a voice called out from below, female clear despite the distance. Impressive shot, blue team, but you can't stop all of us. Rebecca did not respond. She tracked the figures as they began to move again, faster now, abandoning stealth for speed. Brennan's voice on the radio. All positions, engage. Repeat, engage. The forest erupted with the pop of laser tag sensors. Lights flashed in the darkness as simulated rounds found targets. Soldiers shouted coordinates. The carefully planned operation dissolved into controlled chaos. Rebecca fired twice more, both warning shots, forcing the red team advance to break and scatter. Mitchell added suppressing fire, his shots kicking up snow along the creek bed, but red team was committed now. They pushed forward, using the terrain, moving with practiced efficiency. 2 of them broke left, trying to flank the bridge position. The 3rd continued straight up the center. Rebecca tracked the center figure through her scope. Female, moving fast, confident. The thermal signature was clear now, unmistakable. Captain Diane Cross. Rebecca's finger moved to the trigger. Her heart rate slowed, training taking over. She felt the rifle's weight, the pressure of the stock against her shoulder. Distance 200 yards. Wind 5 miles per hour, quartering left. All factors her mind calculated without conscious thought. Cross stopped for a fraction of a second, was checking her radio. That was the moment. Rebecca exhaled halfway, found the stillness between heartbeats, led the target by half a body length to account for movement. She squeezed. The rifle kicked. The suppressor muffled the report to a sharp crack. 200 yards away, Cross's laser tag sensor flared red. Direct hit. Center mass. Cross froze mid-step, then slowly raised her hands, a grin visible even at this distance. She keyed her radio. Red team actual down. Abort. I say I can abort mission. The other 2 figures stopped immediately, raising their hands. The firing ceased. Silence returned, broken only by the wind. Brennan's voice came over the radio, breathless. All positions, report. One by one, the responses came in. No casualties. Bridge secure. Red team neutralized. Rebecca lowered her rifle, exhaustion, finally catching up. Beside her, Mitchell let out a long breath. We did it. We did. They waited for the all clear, then made their way down the slope. The camp was alive with activity, soldiers moving quickly, but no longer with the edge of combat stress. At the bridge, Brennan stood with Cross and her 2 team members. Dutch was there too, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Cross saw Rebecca approaching and nodded. Hell of a shot, both of them. You made it easy. You should have split your team earlier. Cross smiled. Noted for next time. She turned to Brennan. Your sergeant saved your mission. That first warning shot last night disrupted our entire timeline. We had to completely replan, and tonight she read our secondary approach perfectly. Brennan looked at Rebecca. Something had shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe even a hint of embarrassment. Ashford, good work. Thank you, sir. Cross extended her hand. Rebecca shook it. The red team commander's grip was firm professional. I've been doing this for 15 years. You've got instincts I've only seen in operators twice your age. Who trained you? My father, Major William Ashford. He was a pilot, but he taught me to see terrain the way aviators do, from above, understanding how everything connects. Cross nodded slowly. He taught you well. You should consider advanced training, ranger school, special operations. You'd excel. Rebecca said nothing, but the words settled somewhere deep. The teams gathered near the fire pit. Someone had started a fresh pot of coffee. The exercise was officially over. Red team had been stopped, the bridge secure the mission successful. But the real victory was quieter than that. Brennan called everyone to the command tent. All 20 soldiers, blue and red team together, crowded into the small space. He stood at the map table, and for the first time since they had arrived, he looked like the weight had lifted. I want to start by acknowledging something. This exercise exposed significant gaps in our defensive planning, gaps that Sergeant Ashford identified repeatedly and that I initially dismissed. He looked directly at Rebecca. I was wrong. I prioritized procedure over observation, radar over human judgment. That was a mistake, and it could have been a costly one in a real operation. The tent was silent. Brennan continued. Effective immediately, I'm implementing a new protocol. Any soldier who identifies a potential threat, regardless of rank or position, will be heard and their observations investigated. No more dismissals, no more assumptions. He gestured to the map. Ashford will brief everyone on threat indicators and observation techniques. What she saw, how she saw it, and why it mattered. Those skills need to be shared across the unit. Rebecca stepped forward. For the next 40 minutes, she walked them through it. The silent dogs, the radio flutter, the brushed snow, the boot prints, each sign individually minor but collectively forming a pattern. The soldiers listened intently, taking notes, asking questions. Even Rhodes, who had been her harshest critic, paid close attention. When she finished, Dutch spoke up. One more thing everyone should know. Ashford's father, Major William Ashford, saved my life in Grenada, 1983. He flew into a hot landing zone to extract wounded me, included when no one else would risk it. 2 months later, he died in a training accident. He looked at Rebecca. The way she thinks, the way she acts, that's his legacy, and it just saved all of us. The tent was quiet for a long moment. Then Mitchell started clapping. Others joined. Soon the whole tent was applauding. Rebecca felt heat rise to her face. She was not comfortable with attention, with praise, but she nodded, accepting it, understanding what it meant. She had proven herself, not just to them, but to the memory of her father. The briefing broke up. Soldiers filed out, voices lighter. Now the tension of the past days finally releasing. Rebecca found herself standing alone at the map table, staring at the marks they had made. All the evidence, all the signs. Nina appeared beside her. You should get some rest. You've been running on fumes for 3 days. I will, soon. Rebecca, Nina's voice was softer. You proved them all wrong. You can let go now. Rebecca looked at her friend. Can I? Yes, because now they're watching too. And it was true. Outside, she could hear soldiers discussing watch rotations, talking about what to look for, asking each other questions about terrain and observation. The lesson had taken root. Rebecca walked back to the main tent. The Winchester was still on her cot, right where she had left it. She sat down, the rifle across her knees, and for the first time in 72 hours, she felt the full weight of exhaustion settle over her. But not yet. Not quite yet. There was still one more thing to do. She would do it tomorrow night, after she had rested, after the adrenaline had fully faded. For now, she lay back on her cot, boots still on, rifle still close. Old habits died hard, but tomorrow she would show them that even old habits could change, when the time was right. Morning came with a silence that felt earned. The exercise was over, but the camp did not relax. If anything, the mood had sharpened. Soldiers moved through their routines with a new awareness, eyes lingering on the tree line, ears tuned to sounds that did not belong. Rebecca woke at 600, having finally allowed herself 4 hours of actual sleep. The Winchester was still beside her cot, but for the first time she had not held it while she slept. Progress, maybe. Or just exhaustion winning a temporary battle. She sat up, ran her hands through her hair, and laced her boots. The tent was mostly empty. Dutch sat in the corner writing in a small notebook. He looked up as she moved. Sleep. Some. Good. He closed the notebook. Brennan wants a full after-action review at 0800. Red team's staying for it. Cross insisted. Rebecca nodded. Makes sense. They'll want to understand what went wrong. Or what went right. Depends on your perspective. She stood, grabbed her jacket, and stepped outside. The morning was clear and brutally cold. The kind of cold that made your lungs ache with the first breath. But the sun was up, and that made all the difference. Mitchell was at the fire pit heating water for coffee. He saw her and waved her over. Figured you'd need this. She accepted a tin cup, wrapping both hands around it. The warmth was instant relief. Thanks. No, thank you. Mitchell's voice was serious. I learned more in 3 days with you than I did in 6 months of training. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but not in time. He poured himself a cup. That shot last night, 200 yards in the dark, moving target. How do you even practice that? You don't practice the shot. You practice everything that comes before it. The breathing, the patience, the ability to wait for the right moment. She sipped her coffee. My father used to say that shooting is 10% mechanics and 90% discipline. He sounds like he was a hell of a teacher. He was. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the camp wake up fully. Across the clearing, Red Team was packing their gear. Captain Cross stood with Brennan, both of them examining a map and pointing at various locations. At 800, everyone gathered in the command tent. It was crowded, 20 soldiers pressed together, but no one complained. Brennan stood at the map table with Cross beside him. All right, let's break this down. Captain Cross, your assessment. Cross stepped forward. She was in her early 40s with the kind of weathered competence that came from decades in the field. Blue team performed above expectations. Initial reconnaissance was solid. Perimeter coverage improved significantly after day one. The decision to add roving patrols was tactically sound. She paused, looking directly at Rebecca. But the deciding factor was observation. Sergeant Ashford identified our presence before we were ready to act. That single warning shot on night one forced us to completely revise our timeline and approach. By the time we executed our secondary plan, you were already positioned to counter it. Brennan spoke up. What made the difference? What did we do right? You listen, Cross said simply. Eventually, Ashford brought you evidence and you acted on it. In real combat, that responsiveness saves lives. Rhodes raised his hand. But we almost didn't listen. We dismissed the early warnings. Correct, Cross said. That's the lesson here. In asymmetric warfare, the enemy won't announce themselves. They'll probe, they'll test. And if you're not paying attention to the small signs, you'll miss the big picture until it's too late. Dutch added, which is why we need to institutionalize what Ashford taught us. Make it part of standard operating procedure, not just one soldier's instinct. Brennan nodded. Agreed. Starting today, we implement a new watch protocol. Every soldier will be trained on environmental observation. Signs of intrusion, pattern recognition. It becomes part of our core competency. He looked around the tent. Ashford, you'll lead the first training session. This afternoon. Everyone attends. Rebecca felt the eyes on her. Yes, sir. The briefing continued for another hour, going through each phase of the exercise, documenting lessons learned, identifying areas for improvement. When it ended, Red Team prepared to depart. Cross found Rebecca outside the tent. Walk with me. They moved away from the main camp toward the eastern perimeter, where the gorge dropped away. Cross stopped at the edge, looking down into the trees. You know what the hardest part of command is? Rebecca waited. Knowing when to trust your instincts over the rules. Brennan struggled with that. He's a good officer, but he's young. He'll get better. Cross turned to face her. You, though, you already know how to make that call. That's rare. My father taught me to see the whole picture, not just what's in front of me. Major William Ashford. I looked him up last night. Decorated pilot. Multiple combat extractions. Died in a training accident in 1983. Cross's voice softened. I'm sorry. Thank you. He'd be proud of you. What you did here, that's the kind of thinking that saves entire units. Cross pulled out a card and handed it to Rebecca. If you ever consider moving into special operations, call this number. We need people who can think like you do. Rebecca took the card, studied it. It was blank except for a phone number. I'll think about it. Do. Cross extended her hand. Good hunting, Sergeant. They shook and Cross walked back toward her team. Within 30 minutes, Red Team had loaded their gear and departed their tracks, disappearing into the forest. The camp felt different without them, quieter, more focused. At 1400 hours, Rebecca stood in front of the assembled squad, a small whiteboard propped against a tree. She had spent the morning organizing her thoughts, trying to distill 3 days of instinct into teachable principles. Observation isn't about seeing everything, she began. It's about seeing what doesn't fit. Your brain naturally filters out the familiar. It's looking for the anomaly, the thing that breaks the pattern. She drew a simple diagram on the board, a circle representing the camp, radiating lines representing patrol routes. On day one, I noticed three things. Dogs that were always barking went silent. Radio static that had a rhythm instead of randomness. And snow that looked too smooth in one area. She pointed to each location on the diagram. Individually, each one could be explained away. Together, they told a story. Mitchell raised his hand. How do you know the difference between paranoia and valid concern? You document and verify. I didn't raise an alarm immediately. I looked for corroboration, the boot print, the fabric, each piece of evidence built on the last until the pattern was undeniable. Rhodes spoke up. What if you're wrong? What if you call it and there's nothing there? Rebecca met his eyes. Then you're wrong, but I'd rather be wrong and embarrassed than right and dead. The key is to present your observations without ego. State what you saw, not what you think it means. Let the chain of command make the call. For the next 2 hours, she walked them through practical exercises. How to check for disturbed snow, how to identify unnatural sounds, how to use peripheral vision to detect movement. The soldiers practiced on each other, taking turns as observers and intruders. By the end, even Rhodes was nodding along, asking questions, engaging with the material. When the session ended, Dutch pulled her aside. That was good, real good. You've got a talent for teaching. I just shared what my father taught me. It's more than that. You made it accessible, practical. That's a skill. He paused. You thinking about Cross's offer? I don't know, maybe. Whatever you decide, you've earned it. Dutch looked back at the camp. But before you go anywhere, there's one more thing you need to do. What's that? Let them see you trust them, the same way you want them to trust their instincts. Rebecca understood what he meant. That night, after the watch rotation had been set and the camp had settled into its new rhythm, Rebecca sat on her cot in the main tent. The Winchester was in her hands. She had cleaned it earlier, the ritual familiar and calming. Around her, soldiers were preparing for sleep. Mitchell was reading a manual by headlamp. Rhodes was writing a letter. Garrett and Simmons were playing cards quietly in the corner. Nina sat down on the cot beside Rebecca's. Long 3 days. Very long. You going to sleep with that rifle again tonight? Rebecca looked at the weapon, her father's weapon, the tool that had defined her relationship with this team for the entire exercise, the symbol of her vigilance, but also of her separation. She thought about what Dutch had said, about trust, about showing them that she believed in what she had taught them. She stood slowly. The tent went quiet. Not obviously, but she noticed. Rhodes glanced over. Mitchell lowered his manual. Even Garrett and Simmons paused their card game. Rebecca walked to the weapon rack. Each step felt significant, though she tried not to make it theatrical. This was not about drama. It was about evolution. She reached the rack and stood there for a moment, the Winchester in her hands. Then she placed it carefully among the others, making sure it was secure, the barrel pointed safely away. She turned back to her cot. The tent was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Watchful, curious. Nina spoke softly. What changed? Rebecca sat on her cot, pulling off her boots. Nothing changed. Everyone else just caught up. And as if on cue, Mitchell stood. He walked to his cot, picked up his M4, and moved it from across the tent to right beside his sleeping bag. Not in the bag, just close. Ready. Rhodes watched this, then grunted. He reached over and adjusted his own rifle position, closer to his hand. One by one, without a word, the others did the same. Not copying her exactly, just adjusting, adapting, finding their own balance between rest and readiness. Nina smiled. Guess the lesson stuck. Rebecca lay back on her cot, fully clothed except for her boots. For the first time in 72 hours, she felt the tension truly leave her shoulders. The Winchester was 20 feet away instead of 20 inches. But she did not feel less prepared. If anything, she felt more complete. Because now it was not just her watching. It was all of them. She closed her eyes and let sleep come. Real sleep, deep and dreamless. Outside, the wind picked up, but it was just wind. The forest creaked, but it was just trees settling under snow. The night held no threats, at least not tonight. And in the tent, 12 soldiers slept light, ready, aware. The way soldiers should. 3 months later, Rebecca stood on a different ridge overlooking a different valley, but the principles were the same. The unit had been deployed to the Canadian border. Not an exercise this time. A real security detail based on intelligence, suggesting smuggling operations in the area. Weapons, possibly worse. Brennan had requested her specifically for his squad. I need someone who can read terrain, who can see what others miss. She had accepted without hesitation. Now in early May, with the snow finally melting, she scanned the valley below with her binoculars. Mitchell was beside her, no longer the uncertain private, but a confident observer who had learned to see the world the way she did. Anything, he asked. Not yet, but keep watching. The anomalies matter. Behind them, the camp was running smoothly. Dutch had joined them as senior advisor, his experience balancing Brennan's by-the-book approach. The watch rotation was tight, overlapping fields of observation, roving patrols checking dead zones. And in the command tent, Brennan reviewed intelligence with a new methodology. He gathered input from all sources. He trusted observations from every rank. He had learned that regulations were a foundation, not a ceiling. That evening, Rebecca sat outside the tent maintaining the Winchester. The routine was meditative: strip clean, inspect, reassemble. Her hands knew the motions without thought. Nina brought her a ration pack and sat down. You think anything will happen out here? Maybe, maybe not, but we'll be ready either way. Because you taught us. Rebecca looked up from the rifle. I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know. I just reminded you to pay attention. Your father would be proud of what you've built here. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her hands still on the rifle. I hope so. He taught me to see. I'm just passing it on. That night, she placed the Winchester in the weapon rack with the others. No hesitation, no second thoughts. The rifle was secure. The team was ready. The balance was right. She slept deeply but aware. The kind of rest that soldiers learn to take. Present enough to wake instantly, relaxed enough to actually recover. And when she woke at 5:30 before first light, she found Dutch already up brewing coffee by a small stove. Morning, he said quietly, handing her a cup. Morning. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. Dutch looked out at the valley, still dark, the first hints of gray touching the eastern sky. You know what I think about sometimes? What's that? Your father, that day in Grenada. He didn't have to come for us. The LZ was hot. Command had written us off. But he came anyway. Dutch's voice was rough. I never got to thank him properly. 2 months later, he was gone. Rebecca sipped her coffee. He knew. People like him don't need thanks. They need to know the mission mattered. It did. I'm here because of him. And now because of you, there's a whole unit that knows how to stay alive. Dutch turned to look at her. That's legacy, Rebecca. Real legacy. They stood in silence as the sun began to rise, painting the valley in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere in that valley, threats might be forming. Smugglers might be planning their routes. Danger might be gathering, but on this ridge, a unit was ready. Not paranoid, not afraid, just prepared. 12 soldiers who knew when to wait and when to act, who understood that vigilance was not the same as fear, who had learned to trust their observations and each other. The radio crackled. All positions, morning report. One by one, the responses came in. North clear and observing. South clear and observing. East clear and observing. West clear and observing. Rebecca keyed her mic. Overwatch clear. Eyes on the valley. All quiet. But quiet was not the same as safe, and these soldiers knew the difference now. Brennan emerged from the command tent, checking the duty roster. He saw Rebecca and Dutch by the stove and walked over. Anything overnight? Negative, Dutch reported, but Simmons noted unusual vehicle sounds around 0200, distant possibly 5 clicks north. He logged it and increased his observation interval. Brennan nodded approvingly. Good, that's exactly the kind of awareness we need. He looked at Rebecca. You created something here, a culture of observation. It's spreading to other units too. Command is taking notice. It's not mine, sir, it's just good practice. Maybe, but you're the one who made us see it. Brennan paused. There's talk of a commendation for the exercise. What you did saved the mission and probably prevented injuries if we'd had to do this deployment without that training. Rebecca shook her head. Everyone did their part. They did, after you showed them how. Brennan started to walk away, then turned back. By the way, your father, I read his file, what he did in Grenada and before. You're a lot like him. Rebecca felt something catch in her throat. Thank you, sir. When Brennan had gone, Dutch smiled. He's right, you know. About what? About you being like your father, but you're also different. Better maybe, because you know how to teach what he knew instinctively. Rebecca finished her coffee and handed the cup back. I should check the perimeter. Go, I'll hold down the fort. She walked the camp's edge, the morning light growing stronger. The valley was coming alive now. Birds calling, wind moving through new leaves, normal sounds, good sounds. But she listened anyway. For the sound that did not fit, the rhythm that was wrong, the silence where there should be noise, because that was the job. That was the legacy. Not the weapon, not the shot, but the awareness, the discipline to see what others missed. She reached the overlook where she and Mitchell had been the night before. From here you could see for miles. Valleys and ridges, forests and clearings, all of it spread out like a map. Her father had seen the world this way, from above, understanding how everything connected. Now she saw it too, and she was teaching others to see it. That was the mission. That was what mattered. The sun cleared the mountains full and bright. The day was beginning, and on a ridge in the north, a unit was ready, not because they were afraid, because they had learned to see. Rebecca stood there for a moment longer, feeling the sun on her face, the rifle secure back in camp, the team trained and aware. Then she turned and walked back toward the tents. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was doing more than surviving. She was building something that would last. One careful observation at a time.